welcome back everybody. Here's the part where we start painting, but before we paint we have to prep our work with the kneaded eraser. So we're going to stretch it out and squish it up to make it clean, and then we're going to blot it on the paper like this to get any graphite from our pencils up and off of our page so that it does not bleed into our watercolor, because that is no bueno. So a lot of times people will use a wash brush for this part. I'm just going to be using a big old chonky round brush. A wash brush is just very thick and it holds a lot of water. These round brushes that I'm using are also, they hold a lot of water. I'm using sable brushes, sable hair brushes, which hold a ton of water, and it's wonderful. So that's what I'm using. If you have a brush that can just hold a lot of water, that'll do the trick. Also, I'm so sorry, these captions are going to be a little wonky because my video making process is just as iterative as my painting process. So it goes. I'm learning. I did it one way and then I had to come back and do it another way. So it goes. So I'm going to do a wash. Like I said on here, I'm going to paint with water around these three big circles, right? Around the moon, the dragon, the crow, around the castle. I'm going to leave a very rough border around the edges that are not wet at all. I'm just going to leave it dry and just leave those. I'm going to come back and do stuff with it later. So I'm going to work in sections here, like I said, and I'm just going to load up my brush with tons of water to start with a wash. I am basically painting around the circles that I have all the sketches in with just plain water right now. The way that I'm doing this wash, I don't want to wait very long before I start applying paint because I don't want to give the water very much time to dry on the page. I'm wanting the page to be pretty saturated, and I'm going into my paint here and really pulling up a ton of pigment so that I can drop it down into this very wet paint and let it spread around and do its swirly thing and all that stuff. Like, see, I'm grabbing more water because I was like, oh no, it dried a little too much in between the time that I was just over here. This is part of why we're working in sections, because if we try to do the whole thing, then the other sections are going to start drying. And yeah, like I wrote here in this caption, you can definitely mix your colors on your palette if you just want to mix red and blue and get the purple that you like and then drop that right in. I was intentionally not doing that because I wanted some blue and some red to continue to shine through. I wanted to give them a lot of room for movement and texture, because that's part of the fun of watercolor, is that in a way it kind of has a mind of its own and it does its own thing if you give it enough water. If you give it enough water and pigment mixed in and just kind of push it around and see what happens, you know? And here I was noting that I did not pick up more paint. I'm just putting my brush into the water to continue to do what would be a water wash. But because there's already paint in my brush, there's pigment going down on the page. So It's kind of all the same to me because I'm just going to be dropping more pigment in anyway in a minute. But for now, I was just adding more water. That was the goal. And I just wasn't bothered that there was still paint in the paintbrush because it doesn't really matter. Look how it spreads here. It's so fun. I love adding colors to water. We say watercolors like it's this big fancy thing, but it's literally just adding colors to water, and it's such a blast. So since I got so much pigment on my brush, I just left it there. See how it's still there, being all intense in the blue? And then I put my brush back into the water to just get some of that pigment off the brush over at another patch, since I knew that I was going to be adding more to another segment up there. That's why I did that, because then I knew that after I got some of the pigment off my brush and onto the page, then I could come back in with more water and more blue and start to even it out like you see that I'm doing here. And if I didn't have another segment to do that with, I probably would have just, I don't know, squeegeed my brush out a little bit on the palette somewhere, or I might have just washed it off and just cut my losses and, you know, like blotted it off on a paper towel. But I didn't have to because I had another spot on the paper to add to it, so it's all good. Side note, this music is like a little too inspiring. Listen, I'm just using the music that they have in my video editor that's available. So, sorry if it's a little corny. I'm not trying to get copyright striked. I don't know what the past tense of strike is. Struck! It is late. I'm getting loopy. Okay. I don't want to get a copyright strike on a YouTube video, so I'm just using the canned music. Forgive me. It's kind of fun. It's whatever. So you can see here I'm being very liberal with my application of pigment and water. I'm just kind of going nuts. And the great thing about watercolor is that it can dry in the palette like that, so you can really scrub your brush in it and pick up a whole bunch of pigment without necessarily overloading your brush in the same way that will happen if you're working with acrylic or gouache, and you'll see me overload my brush a ton once we get to the gouache part of all of this. And it's okay, an overloaded brush is not a crisis, but it is just kind of annoying, and you do have to just go wash it out and whatever. So anyways, watercolor is different, and I am kind of intentionally loading it up as much as I can so that I can put the pigment down in the water and watch it go. See, I'm just gonna push the paint around. You can push it, you can pull it, you can just move it. Make it do what you want it to do. Also, I was doing a lot of alternating red and blue and water. I'm just kind of going back and forth between those three things, the water, the blue, the red, until it just looks how I want it to look. And see, around this point, I decided I just wanted some straightforward purple. And there is purple in my palette, but the purple that's available in my palette is just a little different than the purple that I get when I mix this particular blue and red. So I wanted to mix them together, and I just decided to go ahead and put some on my palette so that I can just come in and get some straightforward purple in there and not have to keep on going back and forth with the blue and the red. But you can still see some spots where there's some red shining through and some blue shining through, and it's going all right. You just keep on going. You just do what works, you know? I saw somebody say that there are no rules in art, but there is cause and effect. And then I lost the video. Like, that made perfect sense to me, and I don't know if that's just because I'm so saturated in, like, the art world or whatever. I said it to my husband, who is also pretty saturated in the art world, but he was just like, I don't know what you mean. And then I couldn't remember exactly how the person said it. and I couldn't find the video again, but essentially it was about all of the things that we kind of think of as rules, the way that cool and warm colors work together, and if you put more detail in something, it's going to draw attention to it. So if you want someone to look at a specific spot, you're going to add a lot more detail, and if you want something to kind of fade into the background and not be the focal point, you're not going to put as much detail. Those kinds of things. And I just really loved thinking of it as cause and effect instead of as rules, because I get really hung up on the language because I want to teach, because there is an impact. When you change one thing in a picture, it changes other things, and everything is contextual, but they're not necessarily like rules, because there's freedom in art to do whatever you want. Now here we are doing the salt, and I don't have to describe that to you, right? Like you saw me do it. I just got the salt box out and started putting salt on there. I wanted to ramble about there not being rules, okay? Okay, so I'm just putting a whole bunch of salt on this page, and I'm going to let it soak for a little while. Really, ideally, you would let it dry without a blow dryer or anything, because salt is pretty corrosive by nature, so when you add heat to something that's already kind of corrosive, it can stick to the page, it can get annoying to work with. It's not, again, not a crisis, because we did this in class and we used hair dryers and it was all okay, and I did test it here first and it's okay. But ideally, you just let it dry. And I'm putting a fair amount of salt, and I like to drop, it was really fun to drop like a lot of salt where there were bigger puddles of water to let it soak up. It's gonna make a really cool texture, and I think / hope that it's going to make it seem as if there's some stars going on in the background and give us more of a galaxy kind of feel. A little texture can really go a long way. Yeah, so this part you definitely don't want to start before it's completely dry, because, I mean, unless you intentionally want to have some streakiness going on, but I didn't, so I wanted to wait for it to completely dry before I start scraping salt off. And of course I just started by gently tapping it and wiping it down so that any salt that's already kind of loose would just fall right off. And I'll go from that to using a palette knife to really scrape it, or you could use a credit card or those kind of things. Honestly, I committed to not speeding things up in these edits because I wanted it to feel like the slow pace of life. I think that's healthy for our brains, but I'm just going to be here scrubbing salt off of this thing for quite some time, so please do not hesitate to simply skip ahead and skip all of this. Okay, here's where I'm going to go ahead and start scraping it with a palette knife. And I know there will be a caption here in just a minute. Yeah, here we go. I'm pressing down a good bit here. One mustn't be afraid to be a little aggressive when removing salt. Yeah, I said it like Maggie Smith in my head. I don't know why. I couldn't help it. But you gotta be aggressive sometimes. Like, it's gonna stick. And this paper is amazing. So, again, it should be able to take it. I am not sponsored, by the way. I'm not sponsored by Arches Paper. If only. I just super like it. But honestly, like any 300 GCM 100% cotton rag would probably be just fine. But Arches is reliable, and I wish I had a huge audience just so that Arches could sponsor me. that would be amazing. But since they don't sponsor me, you know I have no ulterior motives. It's just great paper. I'm a fan. There's a web cartoon that my kids and I really love to watch called I Love Coconut Milk. And this character is always saying, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so bored. But look at it, it looks great. It's giving galaxy, right? Don't you think? I think it looks pretty cool. Okay, so I wanted to paint around the border because then there's going to be more textures and more things going on, and I know it probably seems kind of crazy because why did we leave the border out and now we're going to paint it? But we're going to do it slightly differently, so there's some differentiation between the border and what's going on in the middle. And since the middle part is completely dry, we can keep that distinction there. Do you see how I'm painting over it and the line remains? Watercolor is so fun. You're gonna see me kind of come back around to each of these little sections and wet it down and add pigment and let that pigment dry just a little bit, but it's not gonna dry all the way, so it's gonna be not sopping wet paper. When I come back to do like another layer, it'll be damp paper, and then sometimes I'll add more water so it's sopping wet again. And this is just, sometimes for me when I'm doing art, I'm just, I say sometimes, it's like 98% of the time, I'm just messing around until things look right or almost right or right enough, you know? So this is a little experimental. I knew what I wanted to do and I was gonna make it wet, wait for it to dry a little bit, add some pigment, decide if I wanted to make it wetter again, dry the wet, wet the dry the wet, whatever, just keep going, adding layers, adding more pigment, add more water to the pigment to like blot it up, and take some pigment out if I needed to. It's pretty malleable. Watercolor is not as malleable as gouache, of course, but it's, if you get to it quick enough, it's a little malleable. You can change things. I put these eagles here to represent my freedom. This is America, darling. You can paint however you want. I will say that the way the paint is pooling up around the tape there, that border may or may not hold. It would be really cool to pull the tape off and be like, here's our clean edge, and I hope it works. You know, not everything always goes as planned, and I really honestly do not know whether that's going to work or not. I know that it has in many cases, but you know, we're working with real materials, and sometimes things go a little sideways. Sometimes the paint gets a little bit too, sometimes it gets a little too wet near the tape. Sometimes it doesn't always go smooth, but you know, we do our best. And it can still be really cool even if that doesn't work out. Forever and always, nothing has to be perfect to be good. Thank goodness. Including us. I used the purple from my palette when I started painting around the border just to try to see if it could be a little bit of a different purple than the one that I mixed. I'm actually honestly not totally sure if these purples are very different. Kind of wanted them to be a little more different, but that's okay. So I grabbed the other blue because in the middle I was using a warmer blue, I think, and now this is a cooler blue. Anyways, it's a different blue, so I'm trying to have some separation here between the border and the middle. But I am going to come back and paint so much over all of this, so in the end it's probably not really even going to matter. But the process still helps us get to the end, even if you can't see every step of the process in the very end. It's still there in the end, it's still baked in even if it's indirectly. Okay, here we are at the end. See you guys next time. Bye!